Welcome to We Are Not Here to Tick a Box with David Kane and Debbie Hayes. Episode 14, Adaptability. So, welcome to this week's edition of We Are Not Here to Tick a Box podcast. And as you've seen in the title, this one is all about a leader's ability to be adaptable. To walk us through the beginning of this conversation, I'll hand over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. So I think where this topic of adaptability came from was reflecting on the last episode of the podcast. We touched upon a really important quality to have of nurturing people. But I think it's also, whenever we talk about these concepts, we've got to look of what I would say is like, what is the spectrum when we're looking at it? Because what we've also got to avoid is over nurturing people and actually become suffocating. And I've worked with, several different people, either who realise they themselves have been in that place or who feel suffocated and don't feel like they've got the room in which to grow. They're being micromanaged and things. So there's always, we always have to look at this sense of adaptability, because in any continuum, and when we've talked about nurturing there, and the ability to be able to step into a more nurturing role for some people, but sometimes you'll need to do less nurturing. And if we also looked at communication, is one area that I would also say is really fundamental in terms of people being able to adapt. So how do you need to adapt your style of communication to meet that other person? So I just think it's important that we always look at what is that spectrum, where have we got the awareness, and are we looking about where do we need to be, and how at any one point do we need to adapt, which comes back to this whole concept of self-awareness, self-responsibility, and it's very, very important, I think, to be able to have, well, it's not being in a box, is it? No. Not standing in a box, not being in your corner. It is allowing yourself to be adaptable and adaptable to changes as well as it comes along.
Moving across that spectrum, obviously you've got your micro, you've got your micro management, your macro management, macro and micro management, and of course there's a scale. But the interesting thing when I think of those type of scales, because there's always the sweet spot in the middle, isn't there? You've got to be able to move, and then the sweet spot. Governments, you've got your left, you've got your right, and most governments are actually centre. It's interesting. There you go again, and interesting from an individual perspective as well. Stress. People work better when they feel good about themselves. So we're talking about what are the consequences of under managing, over managing. Well, from a stress perspective, under managing, people just don't think you care. They don't think you get in any direction, so they don't give you your best. Micromanagement actually creates incredible stress on the individual. They're not going to be able to cope. Whereas in the middle of those two things is absolute performance. That's their sweet spot. So all of these things, it's interesting sometimes when you see some of the some of the graphs and some of the models that you can read in books and things like that. When you actually put them on top of each other, they all interconnect.
Absolutely.
And as a manager, again, for me, we keep talking about learning, and I reflect back on my managerial career. Nobody ever taught me this stuff. I could genuinely, nobody ever really taught. So, for example, my colleague development reviews, the first one I did as a manager was my interpretation of a manager doing mine. It adapted a lot over the years from that, but that's where it started from, and it did. And I think that, what I would say to any new leader out there, any new person who's been put into a managerial position, there is an art to managing. And,
and I prefer leadership, if I'm honest, over management.
Leadership, yeah, absolutely, to leading people without I'll go with you on that. And you know, for me, a lot of the time, people get put into these positions because they were good at the previous job.
Oh yeah.
when you're making this transition, and again in the last episode we talked about good cultures where it's a culture of nurture and development. So actually, when they get in the job, they're ready for that job as opposed to having to learn on the job. But we're still in an era where I believe a vast majority of managers out there have just been plonked into a seat and it's sink or swim time. That's where it is. And if you find that to be the case, you know, then I think you mentioned in another podcast as well, this, you know, the only you yourself have got to develop. You yourself have got to take responsibility. If you have actually been put into a leadership chair without the nurture, guess what? That nurture is not coming. So now you've got a choice. You know, you can either sit there and wait for, you know, hopefully things to just naturally work out, or you can take, I want to take on my own level of responsibility. You know, you surround yourself with the best people, connect with people who have got a reputation of being really, really good in terms of what they produce, whether that be online, in books, whatever it may be, and actually
learn from them
and learn from them.
Look at what those qualities are.
Yeah.
Like I say, they don't necessarily have to be in our immediate field, but also they could be. And allowing people to be bold and build those stakeholder relationships up as well.
Yeah.
You know, learn across the business, not just within your own team, because then when you, for me, that has far greater dividends, both short term and long term, because if you've got a bigger perspective of the business and you've got those relationships across the business, it really does sort of help. And it helps you to understand. And if you've got greater understanding, I think that allows you to be more adaptable, because again, you're not in your fixed blinker perception of the situation. You've perhaps got a greater understanding of the, you know, I'm going to come back to one of my favorite words, that holistic perspective of what the situation is.
I'll show you something that always stood me in good stead over it in terms of adaptability. Okay. And I've always done this in you know, when I was doing my previous jobs. We've talked about evaluation, we talked about that in the series, and what I used to always say to people was never stop trying to answer questions you've never been asked. And this is an interesting, just go with me on this. So for example, some of the things that we used to sell, you know, people think that selling cars is selling cars. Selling cars isn't just selling cars, it's selling warranties, it's selling gap insurance, it's selling paint protection. There's loads of things that go into it. And what I used to always say is, one, it's not about you, it's about them. So what is it? Why is this suitable for that particular customer? But then equally, you know, if you know that you're going to have barriers presented to you, if you've had a question presented to you that you couldn't answer, then you need to go and find an answer that's credible for the future. You know, accurate, you know, completely compliant, but it's accurate. And actually, if you've been asked that question that you've never been able to answer, well, what other questions might you not be able to answer? And from a leader's perspective, adaptability, why wait for crisis? Why wait for the sun to go in?
Yeah.
Why wait? You know, if you're in an organization, if you're in a great position at the moment where everything is going well, one of the best things a leader can do is go, well, even though I don't have to today, and that's a really good thing, by the way, what if? Because by asking yourselves maybe 2 or 3 what ifs a week, what you're doing is you're training your brain that should these things ever materialize, you've already started to think through some of the answers or some of the processes or strategies that I need to get out of. So the best way for me a lot of the time of being adaptable is by actually second guessing what the future could be and actually working in advance of something happening. So we always know, for example, recessions are going to happen. Yeah, and it will. You know, there's going to be a recession in the next 10, 15 years. It could be a deep depression. It could be a medium depression.
There's those patterns, isn't there? And if you can spot what those rhythms and those patterns are, then you can look for those for sure. And those rhythms and patterns, I mean, I quite often speak about this with my own clients about, well, what is the heartbeat? What is the rhythm of your company? Because there's probably probably is a daily rhythm, there's probably a weekly rhythm, a monthly, seasonal, yearly rhythm, and like I say, in a bigger picture, you know, there's probably, you know, like a 10-year flow or whatever. So if you can look at those sort of rhythms and you can spot, well, how can you help to sort of keep that flow? And there's, no matter how great any person or any business is, there's always something that can be improved upon, isn't there?
And you know, one of the best ways as well, and I used to encourage this a lot, and I did, was, you know, look out. So, you know, I used to say to managers, you know, if you're looking at the manager down south or wherever, and they're performing better than you, pick up the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick up the phone. Ask the question, how? But actually, if somebody, you know, and notice that, make sure that when we're doing well, we answer that phone call. Because if you're a leader, again, sun is shining, everything's going really, really well, but there's somebody somewhere who you can see is struggling.
Yeah.
Whether they put the phone call into you, or actually you could offer that helping hand and actually put your hand out to them. What you're going to gain is maybe a different perspective, even though again, from an output perspective, you're seeing something that you believe you could improve with the knowledge and what you're actually doing. What their circumstances are could be very different to anything that you've ever experienced. So even though you've actually offered to help them, thinking it's a certain thing, it might actually materialize to be something different that now you help that colleague to work through. And the consequence of that has made you more adaptable, that God forbid, if those circumstances that you've never comprehended before, that you learned from that person down the road because you offered to help them. And there's that great saying, isn't it? What you give with one hand, you'll receive back, you know, plentifully with the other. It's the same type of thing. So to actually encourage that in an organization, that even though we're separated by 300 miles worth of motorway, or whatever it may be, bring it in a little bit, share that best practice, make it have a purpose. What we're actually doing, again, is we're creating an adaptable leadership team that work together and share experiences that will allow them to be greater in the future. And these are the type of things that, for me, when you say adaptable, that's about, it's not about, oh, dearie me, the heating's gone off, let's go and phone for an engineer. That's not adaptable. That's something's broke, let's go and fix it. Yeah, very, very straightforward. I can't do it myself, I'm going to bring somebody in.
Yeah.
Adaptability for me is your ability to think ahead, to let your mind wander, find solutions in advance of these things ever happening. And the more that you're doing that, the more self-confidence you're going to have, the more you're going to be able to pass on to the next generation. That's adaptability.
It reminds me of driving on the motorway, where, yes, you're in your lane, you can see the car in front, you're looking around, but actually you need to be looking, don't you, 10 cars ahead. You've got to have that peripheral vision, and you have to be adapting to those. I always quite often say, you know, you're not just driving for yourself, you're driving for who else is around you, aren't you?
Absolutely.
And you've got to be prepared to make those changes according to what might happen around you. So if you can get that peripheral vision about, yeah, okay, I can see that's going on, and this, you know, you need to be very, very aware. And if you imagine you treat your business, I guess, like you're driving on that centre lane, you know, look ahead, look behind you, see what these people are doing to the left and the right, and you know.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take you to the big breakfast now. As you said that, then, as you just said that, the big breakfast and Johnny Vaughan. Remember Johnny Vaughan and Denise Out and the big breakfast? Oh, show me age now. I remember they were doing this segment on barbecues. And this guy turned around, so it's a good one, this. The convected heat goes round and round, and Johnny Vaughan, oh, you know what Johnny Vaughan was like? Oh, the convected heats go round and round when he's doing all this business. And that was coming to my head. And it's exactly the same there, isn't it? If you as a manager are doing really well, you're on fire, you're flying. But if that's not being contained, if that's just allowing itself to be in the open air, all that heat's getting lost. Whereas if actually you shut the lid, that can spread. It can spread out around the organisation. You know, everybody can get warmer. Everybody can benefit from this. So, you know, people might think, God, what are these on today? Motorways and barbecues. But do you know what I mean? If barbecue stays in your head, having listened to this podcast, you know, if you consider yourself a barbecue and what we actually said around it, we've won. That's exactly what it was about. Yeah, done. Everybody's going to go away now thinking, hey, I'm a barbecue, game on. Brilliant, outstanding stuff. Love it. Adaptability. Oh, I tell you, wonderful. Oh, dear.
But it's been in the driving seat, isn't it? Being in the driving seat, and
fantastic.
I think that's. Do you know what?
I've enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
Oh, dear me. Who knows where these things are ever going to go? But anyway, outstanding. So I think that's brought us to the end of Adaptability. As always, we hope you've enjoyed it. Get in touch. Let us know what you want us to talk about. All the usual stuff. But keep listening to us. And you know, we really do appreciate your support. Debbie, until the next time, it's goodbye from here.
It's goodbye from him.
Join us next week for episode 50, Working Together.